To Hillary Clinton, policy positions are kind of like socks, something you change at your convenience. Where she stands on any given issue depends far more on cynical political calculation than it does any sort of core values or principles. In fact, the only principle Hillary Clinton really seems to have is the strong conviction that she is deserving of power. And to get that power, she will say one thing on Tuesday and another thing on Wednesday. If you don't believe me, here's a list of 5 Hillary Clinton flip-flops. And if you guys enjoy this, I've definitely got enough material for a sequel. Number 5, gay marriage. In 2004, Hillary spoke on the floor of the Senate and said this:
I believe that marriage is not just a bond, but a sacred bond between a man and a woman. I have had occasion in my life to defend marriage, to stand up for marriage, to believe in the hard work and challenge of marriage. So I take umbrage at anyone who might suggest that those of us who worry about amending the Constitution are less committed to the sanctity of marriage or to the fundamental bedrock principle that it exists between a man and a woman going back into the mists of history as one of the foundational institutions of history and humanity and civilization, and that its primary principal role during those millennia has been the raising and socializing of children for the society into which they are to become adults.
In her 2008 presidential campaign, Hillary Clinton was still against gay marriage.
Let me ask you this about some domestic issues in New York State. This state's always the sort of the social beginnings of so much of this country. People come here, a lot of immigrants. The New York Times recently began posting the celebrations of gay unions. Not just straight people getting married, but gay people who want to announce their unions. Do you think New York State should recognize gay marriage?
No.
No. Okay.
It was not until March of 2013 that Hillary finally supported gay marriage.
Marriage, after all, is a fundamental building block of our society. A great joy and, yes, a great responsibility. A few years ago, Bill and I celebrated as our own daughter married the love of her life, and I wish every parent that same joy. To deny the opportunity to any of our daughters and sons solely on the basis of who they are and who they love is to deny them the chance to live up to their own God-given potential.
What caused the change? Well, it's fairly obvious, actually. In 2008, only 39% of Americans supported gay marriage, and by 2013, when Hillary finally embraced it, that number was up to 50%. So if you're LGBT, you might want to remember that Hillary Clinton has consistently placed her electability before your rights. She does not have the courage to stand by an unpopular opinion. Number 4, immigration policy. If you visit Hillary Clinton's website, you'd think she's very progressive on the issue of immigration. According to the site, Hillary will enact comprehensive immigration reform to create a pathway to citizenship, keep families together, and enable millions of workers to come out of the shadows, end family detention and close private immigration detention centers, defend President Obama's executive actions to provide deportation relief for dreamers and parents of Americans and lawful residents, and extend those actions to additional persons with sympathetic cases if Congress refuses to act. But in 2003, a very different Hillary Clinton had a very different view on immigration.
We've got to do several things, and I am, adamantly against illegal immigrants. I made this exception basically on humanitarian grounds because of the individual stories, but certainly we've got to do more at our borders, and people have to stop employing illegal immigrants. come up to Westchester, go to Suffolk and Nassau counties, stand in the street corners in Brooklyn or the Bronx. You're going to see loads of people waiting to get picked up to go do yard work and construction work and domestic work.
Hillary has also come out against Trump's plan to build a wall, saying that instead of building walls, we need to be tearing down barriers. But as a senator, she voted for a border fence, and strangely even bragged about it just a few months ago.
Well, look, I voted numerous times when I was a senator to spend money to build a barrier to try to prevent illegal immigrants from coming in. And I do think you have to control your borders.
Now, I know that a fence and a wall are not exactly the same thing, but isn't the general idea the same? A physical barrier meant to keep people out? So if you are undocumented or descended from those who were undocumented, know that Hillary's rhetoric about supporting you and giving you a path to citizenship is not born out of any sort of genuine compassion, but only done in the hopes of garnering your vote. Number 3, universal health care.
Time and time again, you hear one thing in speeches, and then you see a campaign that has the worst kind of tactics, reminiscent of the same sort of Republican attacks on Democrats. Well, I am here to say that it is not only wrong, but it is undermining core democratic principles. Since when do Democrats attack one another on universal health care?
That was Hillary Clinton back in 2008, but now she is the one attacking Democrats on universal health care. Bernie Sanders' health care plan is to expand Medicare to cover everyone. But Hillary Clinton and her campaign have repeatedly tried to spin this into Bernie Sanders wants to dismantle Medicare.
Senator Sanders wants to dismantle Obamacare, dismantle the CHIP program, dismantle Medicare, dismantle private insurance.
Well, maybe someone should buy Hillary Clinton a thesaurus so that she understands that expand and dismantle are in fact not synonyms. Furthermore, she has staunchly defended the Affordable Care Act, which is not universal health care, but instead an insurance mandate that is essentially just a gift to insurance companies. This is even sadder when you consider that Hillary Clinton in 93 and 94 was championing universal health care as the First Lady. Recently, at a Clinton rally, the candidate said, "We are going to pull together and stay together and stand up against those powerful forces." And I always get a little chuckle when I hear my opponent talking about it. Well, I don't know where he was when I was trying to get health care in 93 and 94, standing up to insurance companies, standing up against the drug companies. The Sanders campaign had pretty much the best possible response to this. Where was Bernie Sanders when Hillary Clinton was standing up for health care in the 90s? Well, Hillary, he was right behind you. Yeah, I guess you never looked back to see who was back there, but it was Bernie Sanders. And in fact, Clinton wrote Sanders a note in 93 saying, "To Bernie Sanders, with thanks for your commitment to real health care access for all Americans and best wishes. Hillary Rodham Clinton, 1993. Number 2, the bankruptcy bill. I don't even have to explain this one. I'm just going to let Elizabeth Warren do it for me.
I had written an op-ed about a piece of pending bankruptcy legislation. The credit card companies have been pushing to try to tighten the bankruptcy laws, sort of like locking the doors to the hospitals and then claiming nobody's sick in America. So they were trying to get the bankruptcy laws constricted, so that fewer families could get in. Why? Because you can make more money if those families don't go into bankruptcy, if you're a credit lender. Mrs. Clinton saw the piece, and I got a call from the White House. And they said Mrs. Clinton was going to be in town to give a speech in Boston, and would I come and meet with her? I said, sure. And so I put together all my files. I show up at the appointed place. After she's finished her speech, we're ushered into a tiny little room somewhere in the bowels of this hotel, and just the two of us. They close the door. Mrs. Clinton sits down. We have hamburgers and French fries.
And you tutor her.
And she says, tell me about bankruptcy. And I got to tell you, I never had a smarter student. Quick, right to the heart of it. I go over the law. It's a complex law. Went over the economics, showed her the graphs, showed her the charts, and she got it. Within 20 minutes, she could play where the rest of it would come. Well, then that will mean this part's happened. That will mean this has happened. I said, yes, that's right. And at the end of the conversation, Mrs. Clinton stood up. She said, let's get our picture taken, which we did. And she said, Professor Warren, we've got to stop that awful bill. The last bill that came before President Clinton was that bankruptcy bill that was passed by the House and the Senate in 2000, and he vetoed it. And in her autobiography, Mrs. Clinton took credit for that veto, and she rightly should. She turned around a whole administration on the subject of bankruptcy. She got it.
And then?
One of the first bills that came up after she was Senator Clinton was the bankruptcy bill. This is a bill that's like a vampire. It will not die, right? There's a lot of money behind it. And
the bill her husband had vetoed.
Her husband had vetoed it very much at her urging.
And?
She voted in favor of it.
Why?
As Senator Clinton, the pressures are very different. It's a well-financed industry. A lot of people don't realize that the industry that gave the most money to Washington over the past few years was not the oil industry, was not pharmaceuticals. It was consumer credit products. Those are the people, the credit card companies have been giving money, and they have influence.
And Mrs. Clinton was one of them, as senator. Yeah.
She has taken money from the groups, and more to the point, she worries about them as a constituency.
This, to me, is one of the most stunning examples of just how easily Hillary Clinton can be bought by anyone who has sufficient funds. She is obviously a shill, and that is why I call her Shillery. Number 1, the Iraq War. Hillary Clinton's biggest flip-flop is also appropriately her most famous. It's no secret that in 2002, when Hillary was a senator from New York, she voted to authorize the war in Iraq. Here she is giving a speech at the time explaining her vote.
In the 4 years since the inspectors left, intelligence reports show that Saddam Hussein has worked to rebuild his chemical and biological weapons stock, his missile delivery capability, and his nuclear program. He has also given aid, comfort, and sanctuary to terrorists, including al-Qaeda members. It is clear, however, that if left unchecked, Saddam Hussein will continue to increase his capacity to wage biological and chemical warfare and will keep trying to develop nuclear weapons. Should he succeed in that endeavor, he could alter the political and security landscape of the Middle East, which, as we know all too well, affects American security. This is a very difficult vote. This is probably the hardest decision I've ever had to make. Any vote that might lead to war should be hard, but I cast it with conviction.
Now, in 2008, she said she regretted that vote, but she was reluctant to call it a mistake. Now, she at least calls it a mistake. In some ways, this is the least controversial of Clinton's flip-flops. The fact is that many Democrats, out of fear of being labeled unpatriotic, supported the war in Iraq, and opinion polls at the time said that Americans favored going to war. And as we've seen time and time again, Hillary is very reticent to defy the polls. It's almost not even worth mentioning her flip-flop in Iraq because so many politicians have done this exact same flip-flop, and that goes for people on both sides of the aisle. There were plenty of people who supported the war then, and now they say, oops, it was a mistake, it was a bad idea. But the one thing that, to me, makes this worth mentioning is that her current opponent for the Democratic nomination was not swayed by polls, nor was he taken in by the overhyped, jingoistic nonsense rhetoric of the Bush administration.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think any member of this body disagrees that Saddam Hussein is a tyrant, a murderer, and a man who has started 2 wars. He is clearly someone who cannot be trusted or believed. The question, Mr. Speaker, is not whether we like Saddam Hussein or not, The question is whether he represents an imminent threat to the American people and whether a unilateral American invasion of Iraq will do more harm than good. Mr. Speaker, the front page of the Washington Post today reported that all relevant U.S. intelligence agencies now say, despite what we have heard from the White House, that, quote, Saddam Hussein is unlikely to initiate a chemical or biological attack against the United States, end quote. Mr. Speaker, I do not know why the President feels, despite what our intelligence agencies are saying, that it is so important to pass a resolution of this magnitude this week, and why it is necessary to go forward without the support of the United Nations and our major allies, including those who are fighting side by side with us in the war on terrorism. Fourth, at a time when this country has a $6 trillion national debt and a growing deficit, we should be clear that a war and a long-term American occupation of Iraq could be extremely expensive. Fifth, I am concerned about the problems with so-called unintended consequences. Who will govern Iraq when Saddam Hussein is removed? And what role will the U.S. play in an ensuing civil war that could develop in that country? Will moderate governments in the region who have large Islamic fundamentalist populations be overthrown and replaced by extremists? Will the bloody conflict between Israel and the Palestinian Authority be exacerbated? And these are just a few of the questions that remain unanswered.
So much of what Bernie Sanders claimed would happen in Iraq did in fact happen. His assessment of the situation is so shockingly prescient that one almost feels as if he looked into a crystal ball and divined the future. But of course that's not the case. The case is that Bernie Sanders simply showed far better judgment than did Hillary Clinton. And he also showed far greater resolve. And that concludes this list. I hope you've enjoyed it, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up and let me know if you want to see a sequel, because I do have 5 more Hillary Clinton flip-flops that I can share with you. I'm the Amazing Atheist. Peace the fuck out.